Hello, everyone watching and listening. Welcome back to the Free Radical Podcast. This is your host, Swami Padmanav. And I'm here today with yet another friend, brother, and radical personalist. Why not? Kol Pradeep Das. Thank you so much for joining. Kol Pradeep Prabhu.
Thank you, Marsh. Great to see you.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. So I will read a few words of the bio from Kol Pradeep Prabhu. Says like this: Kol Pradeep received his chaplaincy training at University Hospital in Newark, New Jersey. He was introduced to Eastern wisdom texts at a young age, leading to a period of monastic training and later studies in psychology and religion from Rutgers University. He studied at St. Stephen's College, New Delhi for a year before graduating from Rutgers in 2004. Raised in a family of mixed religious heritage, he brings an enthusiasm for diverse faith traditions to his pastoral work as a chaplain. Until his move to Stanford, he had played a very active role as a chaplain, purohit, and pujari at the Bhakti Center in New York City, spiritual and cultural center in Manhattan's Lower East Side. With a background in Hindu ritual and temple worship, Pancharatra, he regularly performs traditional ceremonies, samskar, marking the junctures of life for his religious community. Mm. So I'll share before I forget some little contact. At the end, I will do the same for those who would like to keep in touch with Kul Pradeep Prabhu. So it's K Pradipa, Pradipa, at stanford.edu. Mm. So thank you so much for joining again, Kul Pradeep Prabhu. And how 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 did we meet with one another? I'm just trying to think.
Thank you
How
for
did it happen?
because I was going to bring that up too because I remember we met in Newark actually. We met in
Okay.
Newark
For
when you
sure, it
first
was
came.
on online first. Nowadays,
No,
that's the style. No, no, never.
no. You remember you're staying with Dina Bandhu,
Yeah,
Prabhu.
yeah, yeah.
You-
Oh, yeah, yeah.
and
You may be
yeah,
one
and
of well, you may be
it
one of
was
those few weird people that I never met online before meeting them in person. So that's
yeah,
unique.
yeah, and that was when I met you, and
Mm. Yeah, yeah. You were
that was
neighbors with Dinabandhu at that time.
yeah,
Yeah.
we were neighbors, and then there's the two swamis upstairs, and I remember
Mm.
I
Yeah.
brought you guys downstairs because I have Shalagram Shilas, and he came into the house.
Yeah. Yeah. I had the honor to visit your sacred cave downstairs.
It was yes, it was a cave. Yeah, I
Yeah.
remember that. That's I remember. And then we also went. I don't know if it's that trip or a trip after that. We drove into the city.
Yeah, we
Uh,
had a car drive. I can recall we had a car drive.
yeah,
Yeah.
we
And
had
maybe
interesting.
another next visit after that is that I remember just like photographically, we had it like a talk outside the place I was staying, which was an art studio of a friend of Dina
Yes,
Bandhu. So
also in Newark.
we had a
Yeah,
talk outside there. I think it was raining after that with
yeah,
Namrasa probably,
yeah. Did Nam come?
or
Did
he
he come?
came later. I don't know.
He
Dina
came.
Bandhu was there for sure.
Yeah, Dina. I think it was Dina and I, and then Nam. I think he, of course, you stayed at Nam. Nam's my brother-in-law,
Hmm. Yeah.
so our connections just keep
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
connecting. So
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah, I
happy to.
recall. Yeah. And in fact, I recall in that conversation, one of the many topics that came was that the topic came somehow or other maybe in relation to the topic of that time, which was I was writing about on whether bhakti was inherent or not in the jiva
Right.
and different reactions and opinions, and you were presenting this idea, the importance of somehow creating a culture of debate in our
Yeah.
tradition. and,
Yeah.
and, and eventually some of those thoughts took further shape when I had my first podcast with Namrasa,
Yeah.
and of course that then took to, well, a few things
Yes. Yeah.
in my
Yeah.
life. So you are to blame for all that happened in my life and what's going on, just in
Yeah.
case.
I was reflecting on that this morning actually. I
Yeah.
apologize.
No, no, no,
No,
no, please. On the
no.
contrary.
In many ways it's yeah, I have thought about it because as you're anyway, we'll talk about it probably more a little
Yeah.
later.
Yeah.
But as you can, developing this
Yeah.
community,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Totally.
this
Totally.
idea where we could like it should be we should be not afraid of conflict, but
Mm,
maybe we should be afraid of like harm or abuse or something. Like we can
mm,
have conflict without like abuse, without harm.
mm,
And I think we're really far from being able to have that kind of discourse
mm.
with each other, which is unfortunate that I've seen. And you've
Agree.
actually done a lot of work. Now you're doing a lot of work about, but you've also been you've been like ground zero experimental case of trying to see if this is possible, and with
Mm.
some kind with conflicts that were and I guess I wish were not necessary or not didn't happen.
Mm. Since you kickstart with that particular topic somehow, why do you think we are so afraid of conflict in general? Not only in Gaudia community, but I will say probably as human beings, as a species, but maybe more specifically in our tradition, if you will.
Yeah, I mean it's a very I mean in chaplaincy we deal a lot with like conflict and trauma, and so
Hmm.
a lot of times we've had to kind of just sit there with it. Like when you go into an emergency room and someone's child has died and they're angry and they want to blame everybody and they're throwing chairs, and
Hmm.
there's just nothing you're going to say that's going to make that better. And we're
Hmm.
not really ready. Most people, not we, but most people are not. We're not really ready to take that or handle that, because it's frightening. Because sometimes when voices get raised, or you can sense a person's emotions are getting, you know, angry,
Hmm.
we have defense mechanisms. We could shut down, we could retaliate to defend ourselves, which is natural and acceptable, but it just leads to kind of more conflict. It could get,
Hmm.
because if I was in that room and someone was saying starting to get angry, and I was like, stop, what are you doing? You can't, trying to say, don't be stupid, you're doing, and sometimes that works. And sometimes nothing works, and sometimes, in those emergency room situations, like the police, they just come. You can't, there's nothing that could be done. But I think in like a lot of the cases I've seen with especially our tradition, our Gaudia tradition, where it's like discourse and dialogue,
Hmm.
we can't even really get to the point of like a fruitful discourse, if we shut down, or we just go back and forth, just trying to one up another person without listening or hearing or
Hmm.
understanding where they're coming from.
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking just on the last point you mentioned, without listening or hearing, and again, I don't think it's ever enough to emphasize how much do we need to learn the art of empathic listening, and how hard it is generally, because that entails entering to the other person's world, and that can be very scary for many of us, because we are not generally willing to explore
Right.
other dimensions, what to speak of other people's life, even our own inner world, certain parts of that inner world. We are not willing to look in that direction. What to speak of jumping into other person's heart through empathy and connecting with whatever there may be, which may be hell, as
Right.
the cases that you are mentioning. And instead of that, we may have like a very automatic response, or our idea, as you say, of dialogue, maybe just like, I have my set of things to say, and you are supposed to listen, and I will be kind enough to listen to your own set of things you have to say.
Right.
But still, that is not bada, no, that's not the deep conversation with both parts are willing to be transformed by one another. And I would think, in connection to your experience as a chaplain, which I like to go into depth in many directions, but what you just mentioned, in some cases you just don't have to say anything. That's the best thing you could possibly say, is to unsay yourself, not say anything, and listen. In
Right.
connection to this, just be present, accept the situation, accept the people, hear them, listen to them, and
Right.
be present without saying it, which, again, sometimes it's not easy.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not easy. And the same with conflict. We are afraid of conflict because it demands that we listen more attentively and we pay attention to the other person. And generally, it's too scary. It's too
Yeah.
unknown.
I I'd like to say, well, generally, first, like chaplaincy is, it's for the most part, it's been a Christian Western construct of like
Mhm.
being able
Mhm.
to be a minister to populations. And then chaplaincy became more like basically you have priests in secular spaces. But
Mhm.
before I say, because I preface that because as a devotee, as a Gaudiya Vaishnava, I know that a few of us who are chaplains are trying to, not necessarily break that structure, because there's a lot of positive things in it. It's just like it's really hard to kind of assert, the type of care that we give. But that also has to be defined. But the point I'm prefacing this as to what you're talking about, so that's not non sequitur, is that's this idea of, like, this Christian idea is
Mhm.
the ministry of presence, and how profound that can be. And it is listening, and it is
Mhm.
hearing someone, but simply just the idea of presence is a very powerful thing. And I know it's something that's like becoming more common in, like, like this kind of therapeutic culture we're kind of going through right now. But
Mhm.
presence, I'd say, in a hospital room, with family, with friends, in all circumstances, it just like improves the quality of that relationship, and being able to establish presence. And so that's why they call it in chaplaincy a ministry of presence, because it's a powerful thing that connects people essentially to God, which is, I think, what you're also trying to. These are kind of the things I've heard you say with your new idea of community. This idea of that this also reflects our presence, our connection, our relationship with God.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. I cannot but think about the term tadatmya that I chose to invoke with this notion of devotional alliance, or uh, yeah, new way of belonging in my idea. Not new, but something necessary, and the importance of. I love the expression ministry of presence. That's great. That's
Yeah,
beautiful, and it's so underrated sometimes, or underestimated, being present, how powerful that can be. And sometimes we feel the need to say something on top of our presence, so to say, and we end up talking too much and being not so present, so to say,
yeah,
and like running on top of the other person with words, but not like joining them in a deeper sense of presence, whether we are talking, preaching, quote unquote. Sometimes preaching, we may think I have to say this and this and convert the person, so to say, instead of giving that other soul a magical moment, an epiphany of being unconditionally heard, listened to, and accepted. Like
yeah.
that may be more powerful than maybe being very expert in selling them 20 books in a moment, so to say.
Right, right.
So I'm more interested in the experience of conversion, so to say, that comes through that ministry of presence. And yeah, it makes me think of the idea of mauna in our tradition, which is silence. And that's mentioned in the Bhagavad and in the Gita. Krishna himself says, I'm silence personified of all secret things. So for me, silence is not, as I mentioned in radical personalism, it's not so much about not speaking, not talking, but listening. No?
Right, right,
Like make silence so you can receive the other, hear, embrace the circumstance. As you mentioned, not to sit with the other person, to sit with their emotions instead of sitting on those
right,
things.
right.
Because sometimes we sit on our emotions instead of sitting with them and having a conversation. So I will say that sometimes we have some difficulty in having conversation with each other, because to begin with, we are not having too much of a conversation with ourselves. We are not culturing what I like to call, I don't know, emotional intimacy, like
Yeah,
intimacy with our own inner landscape. So of course, again, you are invited to a conversation where there are, of course, the risk, quote unquote, the potential of differences of opinion. You have to be empathic, you have to be transformed by the other, and that's like too much of a horror movie to enter in for many of us.
right. It's one.
Yeah.
It's a very, well, a couple of things I could say that, and maybe this is also part of it, is that in the hospital, a chaplain in the hospital, like, we were always running towards like emergencies in any room or any place we go to. Like, it's, whatever, the chakras open, the vulnerability is apparent. Like, so
Mm.
everyone, the chakras they're very,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
but
Yeah.
like basically everyone is open to express and share. Um, And I realized that now that I here at Stanford, which is I'm in the university, and so most of the people that come in are faculty or staff, or I mean, students or faculty, sometimes staff, but it's very different, that type of presence, and
Mm,
and it's a presence that's also kind of some of the students are straight up coming in and saying, like, you know, I went to the mental health advisor, I went to therapist, but I'm here because I just want you to tell me what's the right thing to do. Because they're like, I want to speak to a chaplain, like, this is more of a an ethical thing or an existential thing. And so
mm,
I it's different for me because they're asking for like a guidance, and that's not something that we were necessarily trained for in chaplaincy. We're
mhm.
basically helping them understand the, you know, the things that they're experiencing. And I think that's part of like the idea of not just presence, but and relationship, is that we do have like agency, we do have like a type of discrimination that we can share with each other, and we can help each other, we can add to people's like lives. We don't have to just be um, you know, like a non-active presence.
Mhm.
I'm also learning that here because as I think we were talking on Messenger, like when I just got here in August, and then October 7th, our entire campus was divided quite
Mhm.
politically.
Mhm.
And as the Office of Religious and Spiritual Life, we're kind of really embedded into, we're not one side or the other. We're really deeply embedded in both, and we tried to be present,
Yeah.
but it's difficult. And sometimes that presence backfired on us because some people thought like, oh, why are you there? Or why are you there?
Mm,
You're not,
mm,
you're with them, you're not with us.
mm.
And another part of presence, I think a large part of it is patience and being able to kind of, you know, take time, you know, through those difficulties,
Yeah.
and, you know, be able to continue to be like very consistent and persistent, but reliably in the same state. That's
Mm,
the kind of presence of a chaplain, is to be like, you know, consistent presence.
mm.
So it's a complicated presence, and then sometimes it involves, you know, maybe like edging, pushing things a little forward. It's
Mm.
hard, but yeah, sometimes, and sometimes it just takes real, like long type of like enduring patience.
Hmm. Oh, yeah. You triggered a few very some ideas that I'd like you to elaborate a little bit more, if possible. One of them, you just started saying that somehow you are living in a constant state of emergency, so to say, or coexisting with other people's situation of emergency, which by empathic connection becomes your emergency as well, so to say.
Yeah.
And how that to inhabit that, I don't know how to call it, like liminal space, as you mentioned, you are you need to be in a by necessity you have to be fully open at the very situations I imagine impact on you and those who work in those lines, to be in that situation of vulnerability, of visceral sensitivity and empathy. So I was just wondering how, because of course that's your case as a chaplain, but I will say in one sense each of us should need to ideally to live our life from a place of not, maybe not emergency, but of vulnerability and visceral openness. So I'm just thinking about any thoughts you may have in how someone who is not a trained chaplain may try to inhabit those spaces on a daily basis, because it's so easy to go in the opposite directions, as we were talking, to be non-vulnerable, to
Mm.
shut our faculties, our openness, to have all the chakras gone to ruin, so to say. While not going to an idea of neurosis, because sometimes I've seen also the devotees, okay, let's invoke emergency state so we remain open, and
Yeah.
with things like, okay, this can be your very last day on earth, so you have to leave it as it's the last day. And it's, of course, it's very plausible that that's the case. The more the days pass, the more plausible that will be. But my point is how we deal with those ideas also because we enter into a state of emergency, but it can also be neurosis. And I'm sure in your particular case, you deal with emergency, but hopefully in a way that is not neurotic for you nor for others. On the
Right.
contrary, you have to invoke another
Right.
sense of presence. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that connection.
You mean like how to kind of evoke that mood in just day to day
Yeah,
life, right? Not
yeah,
just like
yeah.
being in
Without
emergency.
going neurotic or forcing emergencies in our life,
Yeah.
but keep ourselves open,
Yeah.
vulnerable, and open to the other people's uh, vulnerabilities. Even if they are shut or closed, everyone remains vulnerable, as I
Right.
mentioned in my book. I mean, we are vulnerable whether we like to acknowledge it or not. That's our choice.
Yeah.
Acknowledge it or not, but we are vulnerable. So,
Yeah.
in
I
your experience, yeah, what has been your
you
experience,
know,
and on that basis, some advice.
I'm going to say in my experience only because it's my own.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
my, I'm actually experiencing the difficulty of it now.
Okay.
Is you need, well, it's not just like you need community. That's true. Which of course this is the really big part of the work you're currently doing. But that
Mm.
kind of, well, those friendships, relationships. As I moved out here to Stanford, like all my old friends, my community are back in New York and New Jersey, and so I was just talking to my wife.
I stopped listening to you.
Yeah, sorry.
You were just talking to your wife. You told me, yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, I just realized like it's hard. I've been pretty disconnected in general, just also focusing on work and making new connections there, but just not the same. You know, you can't just replace that. But that the truth of the matter is, like a lot of our relationships and our friends are they're complicated, and you know, I could be angry, I or I could make a mistake, but that constant like connection with people, it keeps us it keeps us up to task about trying to be better people. I mean, that's part of what, you know, I'd like to think what marriage is about trying to create, putting two people who have these obvious conflicts of personality that allow
Hmm.
you to kind of be honest, to have integrity or not, and find out someone telling you where you're being wrong.
Yeah.
But that's also very evident in a lot of my friendships as I'm getting older, and I'm
Hmm.
realizing like, you know, a lot of times maybe I've been wrong, that I maybe walked away when I shouldn't have. And it's hard to really face that and to
Mm.
be honest about that.
Mm.
And not to be like just always, you know, just maybe carrying it on your shoulders that you did something wrong, but kind of accepting what's happened and having that be a lesson, and maybe in some ways be able to do a repair. That's one thing, is just try to keep connections, family. Don't isolate. For
Mm.
Anton Poison, who was like the father of pastoral care or
Mhm.
clinical pastoral care, he said isolation was the root of mental illness in his experience.
Mm.
So connections and relationships. And the other thing, the other second thing, and this is the only other thing I could think of, was that when me and Dina Bandhu were trying to articulate this kind of spiritual care from our Gaudiya perspective,
Yeah.
when we're thinking of this ministry of presence, we're like, we don't have anything necessarily like this, and like we don't, there's no Sanskrit phrase or terminology that I could think of. But what I could
Mm.
think of was its opposite, and its opposite was pramada, was inattention.
Mm.
So like that, there's something about when we do japa or harinam japa, that is, or kirtan, or that if we realizes that that is a relationship, and that pramada, that inattentiveness, it's almost it's like talking to someone and not listening to them. That's what pramada here. But you're talking to God, you're
Mm.
praying to
Yeah.
God, you're
Yeah.
doing harinam,
Yeah.
you're doing japa. So that's one aspect, like that's the opposite of presence. That's not being present. And
Hmm.
so that's a practice, that's a daily practice, that's our sadhana, to be present,
Yeah.
um, in this relationship, this essential relationship with God.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so that should also reflect on how we should reflect on how we are relating with others. So that's our practice of how to have to be vulnerable. And I've had like these japa sessions where I'm just sitting straight for 2 hours, and like a lot of things come out: fear, anger, frustrate. Like if you really are focused on
Yeah.
all those levels, like these emotions of vulnerability and fear, they really do come out. I mean, that was my experience. Like,
You are not alone, Cool Pradeep.
yeah,
Welcome to the club. Yeah, yeah. Thank you for your vulnerability and your honesty in sharing your journey. And yeah, I totally agree. And that's why, again, why for some of us presence may be scary, but at the same time we have to use our discernment and understand where the fear comes from and how we should confront that, because if not, we will never be able to sit with, again, with our emotions, with our inner worlds of fear, and create a whole galaxy of distractions, which again the world in itself is very much promoting, and it's so easy to become absolutely distracted. And I think one of the main things we can offer as bhaktas to Krishna is our attention, so to say, no, like to conceive our focus and our presence, if you want to put it like that, attention, focus, presence, like an offering. No? And I appreciate your emphasis on presence, because sometimes we may speak about attention and we take it more like a technical thing. I don't have to be distracted. I have to, but presence is a way more, for me, way more deeper way of speaking about the same thing. Like not only chant with attention, but chant with presence and be present, because there's someone else that you are supposed to be talking with. It's a two people affair. It's you and Harinam, who is none different from Bhagavan. So let's be willing to have some quality time with not only with the name, but as you mentioned, in that quality time with the name, so much crap will come,
yeah,
so to say. And that's part of the process. No, that's part of the anartha nibriti. For me, it's not only the byproduct of chanting, but the willingness to go through the byproduct of chanting. Chetodarpanam Arjuna. Because if I'm not willing to witness all the stuff that is manifesting in the form of fear and doubts and dualism and so many things, ulterior motives and so many layers, if I'm not willing to be present in witnessing that, uh, probably I may be creating a whole evasive system in the name of
yeah,
sadhana, so to say. I may be conducting myself in practice and life in a way so that I don't have to confront all that stuff. But
right,
it externally looks like sadhana, externally looks like Krishna bhakti, so nobody can tell me anything.
right.
But I'm just running and running away from my shadow in Jungian terms, so to say, instead of looking up to it and embracing it and integrating all those layers, so to say. So
I
yeah.
mean, I'm not to say also like I don't want anyone or would interpret that as to say like, oh, like, you know, you feel fear when you do japa, or you feel anxiety. But I think there is some level of,
I mean, on a certain level, that should happen, we can say.
yeah. It's not like I don't also feel like love, or like that connection that's, God's, Krishna speaking to me.
Mm.
I mean, also that also that I'm also just, but also that connection. I am feeling that connection,
Yeah.
and so, but though that's all tied up in like that essential, quintessential relationship, and
Yeah.
that is something worthy exploring, because a lot of those feelings they don't need to be transcendent. I'm not trying to tie transcendence to that. It's not like a bhava. I'm talking about like these are perhaps material fears, or material senses of ineptitude or honesty of accepting, like there are things that we don't come up to, that I'm not diligent with my japa as I should be, or
Mm.
I'm not living the life that I should, or I shouldn't, even to say like I'm not being the best person I could be. And I know
Mm.
those are general terms, but like I could tie to like, oh, I shouldn't have spoken to my wife that way, or I shouldn't.
Mm. Mm.
And that's not something that should come up in japa, and I could push it away, and I could say, but am I being a genuine, like,
Yeah.
am I being the bhakta? Am I being, you know,
Yeah.
Brahma Bhuta Prashanatma,
Mm. Mm.
I'm not there.
Mm.
So if I can't do that, you know, how can I then go to Krishna.
Yeah. Yeah. How can I? Yeah. How can I be coherent with my potential and where I am? What's my potential? Not betray myself. I was thinking something that you mentioned, been interesting about isolation and some. I think professor of yours, someone you were reading, that he said or she said,
Oh, this is
isolation.
Anton Boysen. He was the father of like modern chaplaincy. He passed
Oh,
away like many,
okay.
but this is from the Cure of Souls. My Guru Maharaj had done many.
I see. I see. But that was a very powerful line, no? Like isolation being like the root cause of mental illness. That's very, like, that makes a lot of sense, because on the opposite, we will receive, in our tradition at least, the notion that everything is somehow connected and interconnected, sambandha, everything is tied around like a common center, and reality is already connected, we are already connected. So isolation is, I will say, more like an unawareness of that fact, no, a lack of awareness that we are already belonging to a center. No, I mean, it's not that we are actually isolated beings. So I think that's the most desperate thing. Like, I know I'm not isolated, but I feel isolated,
Yeah,
while in root I'm not. So that particular how to say, yeah, disconnection basically of who we actually are, that can result in so many forms
yeah,
of. It reminds me the line of the Bhagavatam, Bhayam Dvitiya Vinivesata Shyat, somehow also, no? Like being absorbed in dualism, kind of, I lose sight of who I am in oneness, in terms of non-dual connection with my source, and Bhayam, fear
mm,
comes, and
mm,
all varieties of, if you will, mental illness, so to say.
right.
So
Yeah,
yeah, that was a
yeah,
powerful line.
yeah,
Isolation.
yeah.
Yeah.
It is. It is a very. I see that a lot with. It's a very common theme. It's especially when people are speaking to me. It's not necessarily. It doesn't come out as like I feel alone, though it does
Mm-hmm.
at times. But essentially, a lot of it's like these. My 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 partner doesn't understand me. My family doesn't understand me. Nobody understands what I'm going through,
Mm-hmm.
and that makes someone just feel like this immense burden is on them. And the truth of the matter is, it's a very common. I feel it as a person sitting speaking to someone. I wouldn't say like, hey, I feel the same thing, because that would kind of just like overshadow
Yeah.
what the trauma that's happening. But I it's just I see over and over again. And dukkha doesn't have to be the big, suffering. Dukkha is just can be that constant over time, just gnawing away of like
Yeah.
of suffering, of like disconnectedness, isolation, that pain
Yeah.
that's associated with that.
Yeah. But you multiply that day per day per day, like slow erosions of normalcy, so to say, and that kind of
And it
result
erodes.
eventually in some clinically diagnosed mad person or whatever. And,
Yeah.
and recently, I don't know why, but in connection to what you mentioned, this idea of people feeling I need to belong, I need to feel myself part of something bigger, I found, so, at least on a personal level, but also talking with many devotees and friends, I've witnessed the impact of this idea of, and this is not foreign to our tradition, but somehow it has not been emphasized enough, in my opinion, and is the notion that God already, of course, if you're a theist, I will say that God already loves you unconditionally. So we are already fully accepted by the divine. We are already fully loved by Him, which there's lots of precedent for that in other mystical traditions and ours as well. And I think that creates a very, how to say, foundational, stable, supporting paradigm to begin with the conversation. Like, you're already accepted by God, you're already fully loved. I mean, I'm not saying that's enough. You say that and just solve all your mental problems. But if that idea is not in place, if you are a theist and that idea is not full in place, that can really affect your sense of isolation and fear. And God is angry with me, and I have to be like a
Mm,
perfect boy or girl, and projection of unresolved father issues. So many things can get in the way, right?
right.
So I personally, I don't know, I'm just sharing my experience, recent experience. I felt this is really like grounding, no, like entering to that space of, you already belong, you are already accepted, fully loved, fully, and it's a matter of becoming aware of that, and then trying to reciprocate with that out of a sense of joy and celebration and gratefulness, which I feel is way more healthy orientation even to spiritual life than just, okay, I have to serve Krishna, if because if I don't do that, this will happen and all this stuff. No,
Right.
so
Right. I
anyhow.
think that one thing I learned since I've come here to Stanford, I feel like I'm learning a lot working with a really great team of chaplains, and a lot of the work that you're doing. And actually, when I was trying to create like a model of spiritual care for our community, I had, and this is at the Bhakti Center, where it was
Mm-hmm.
like the individual dealing with, like, say, trauma or whatever feelings of type of crisis that the person goes through, and then there was a group type of conflicts, and that was more interpersonal, like trying to heal interpersonal conflicts. And then there was a third part, a society kind of conflict or trauma, and I couldn't find the term for it. And when I came here to Stanford, one of my colleagues, who's a Presbyterian minister, she said that's called moral injury. And so basically, we have, like, in society, the trauma of a society is a moral injury, and a moral injury is where individuals lose faith in structures because of traumas that they've experienced, or feelings like, oh, this child abuse again, well, that's just the way religions are, so we just come to accept it over time. That's just the flaw of society, that's the flaw of me, that's the shortcoming of me. So as you're saying this, like, a lot of times, like, we have this misperception of what religion is, that, or that
Mm-hmm.
God hates me, or that because of the institution, I don't, because of this kind of, not the institution or society or community, I've come to feel like I can't fit in here, or I'm not good enough. According to that, it's not like the type of, like, the japa experience where that comes out, where
Mm-hmm.
that's one to one, you and God, and you can
Mm-hmm.
confront that. That's when, like, someone feels like, well, I haven't, I'm, well, maybe I'm gay, and I can't belong here in this community, or they hate me, or they don't accept me,
Mm-hmm.
which and so that's a type of, say, moral injury, where the institution kind of gives this like impression that a person's not acceptable, or a person is rejected.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are things about moral repair, and it's a very broad topic that seems to be expanding, but that was a
Yeah.
very that's another type of, like, it's another type of, like, healing or repair that needs to take place, that I think that you've been working on with radical personalism. And I
Yeah.
think this is this is the larger thing that we have yet, I think, in our Gaudiya traditions, to really look at our history and see the history of kind of moral injury,
Mm.
and the type of, like, maybe discourse that we've had that kind of perpetuates, where we're just still kind of battling about histories, instead of just accepting that, yeah, you know what, we have histories that are they're difficult,
Yeah.
like, what the the Advaita Vamsa, or whatever traditional Gaudiya lineage may criticize the Gaudiya Mat for starting things, like whether it's sannyasa ashram or these diksha mantras. There is a conflict, but here we are, the large, the Gaudiya in the West, the Gaudiya presence in worlds outside of India is immense. And
Mm-hmm.
so you can't, to sit down and just sit down and have a discourse about that without um, really just having at each other constantly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, that's more. I think that's a result of, like generations of moral injury. Ways.
Yeah. Yeah. That I think is kind of a realization I came after I published my first book, and I must confess, I was relatively naively expecting, okay, this will allow. I mean, it allowed for conversations and interesting exchanges and interesting experiences. Till today, I'm receiving messages from people reading the book, and but also it allowed for an interesting epiphany in terms of me feeling what you are mentioning. Okay, there is in your words, we have layers and layers of generational moral injuries in our tradition, which now it's kind of still it has not even yet fully named and framed, so it can be addressed and healed. So it's getting in the way over and over again in our attempt to have a conversation. And I received, yes, considerable backlash and reactionary messages, and I was really surprised. Like I didn't expect that degree of that way of expressing opposition, so to say. I was expecting opposition, of course, because I knew that the viewpoint I'm sharing and certain thoughts I'm sharing, I mean, I know that big part of our community doesn't agree, doesn't think like that. But
Right.
I was looking forward, let's agree to disagree and let's have a conversation on
Right.
that in human terms, let's say. Then we can talk in Vaishnav terms.
Right.
But sometimes some of the interactions were pretty, not, I will say inhuman, but sometimes very, yeah, ultra sensitive, just to not to criticize the other person, but just that made me think, okay, here we have lots of unresolved stuff from not even from that particular person, but from the generations in the background of that person's group or affiliation, which somehow gets triggered when a topic like this comes. So
Right.
it made me realize, okay, probably I was in a naive way attempting to, let's have this idyllic conversation and let's get together, and I realized, wow, this may take a few millennia probably or something like
Well, that conversation we had on in that car ride
yeah.
into the Bhakti Center, and I, s- I am well, I am sorry that what has happened, because when you
No,
when you
stop
publish something,
apologizing. That was, stop apologizing, please. That
well,
was perfect what had
it's not
happened.
like because
I'm
I
not
watched,
complaining. Yeah, and I'm
but
not complaining about what happened or blaming anyone. I mean,
it's
it
not
was
like
a
it's the
big
source of
epiphany.
me. I guess I'm saying that I watched that, like I saw you being diligent, and like here's like the reality. Like, let's look at the history. Shankaracharya writes a Bhashya.
Mm-hmm.
The way to respond is Ramanuja Sri Bhashya. Ramanujacharya has a Sri, and so there's a certain etiquette of that discourse. Okay, and I could hardly say that Facebook comment threads on progressive Vaishnavism is exactly the the Vedanta rhetoric. In some ways, it's the modern type of Purva style,
Mm-hmm.
but it's also combined with a lot of vitriol and of course email, and so the
Yeah.
discourse, it never happened. The
Mm.
response would have been another published book, which I think there may have been, but we haven't really seen it. And this is also like, I know you've moved on to other things, but at the essence of it is the work that you're following now is just like, well, why
Mm.
can't we have this discourse? What
Mm.
is going on?
Yeah.
Why
Yeah.
why
Yeah.
can't we come to this place of having a
Yeah.
conversation about why this doesn't work for us? Or
Yeah. Yeah.
you know
In one sense, my second book on radical personalism, just I would say it has been carried by the same spirit as the first book, which is, again, as you mentioned, why we cannot have this conversation and this other conversation and this other. It's not about whether Bhakti is inherent or not in the jiva, and I want to defeat you and let's see who is right. I mean, to be honest, in one sense, if you or others think, oh, for me it's inherent, okay. I mean, we can have a conversation
right,
and we can disagree, but the important thing is to have the conversation, not to
right,
agree or disagree. I mean, I don't care to agree or disagree. I care for the conversation.
yeah,
And the spirit of radical personalism is basically, I would say, like an overflow of that. And I will say, in part, the whole content of that book came as a byproduct of my experience after publishing my first book, and all these dynamics that came regarding the attempt to have a conversation and receiving different reactions, and so many other topics that are coming, and situations in our Gaudiya community that clearly required conversation and presence, again, a ministry of presence. And many devotees telling me there's no place for conversation, there's no space, there's cancel culture. If I talk, I'm afraid this will happen. I've been
yeah.
so
It's
okay.
deep.
We need conversation.
It's deep. I mean,
Yeah.
it runs like I said. So we were in my work at Stanford. The conflicts became so vitriolic. There was no place. It just
Mm,
like it was so out of hand. It was, for me, even I compared it to the type of trauma that I might see in an emergency room. Like
mm,
we're just saying awful things. Some might say awful things on both sides, on both
Hmm.
sides.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And but there are spaces where our people, a majority, there's a large place where people aren't just on polar opposites, that they are trying to have these discourses, and they're
Yeah,
happening now, but it took time for
yeah,
it to happen.
yeah.
And it is possible, it will happen. It's just a lot of times we just see the most sensational sides of like one thing or another. um, but I think honestly the points you're talking about are really, I don't think this is just like, another concept, or like, it really, it does strike deep to a lot of how we as a community interact with each other, and it could
Mm.
ultimately be destructive.
Mm.
I mean, we can see it in many different contexts where communities and societies destroy each other because of their
Yeah,
inability to, and it
yeah,
can
like
happen. I mean, obviously,
yeah,
this is
like
what's happening now.
Prabhupada say this movement can be not destroyed from outside forces, but from the inside.
And some
Yeah,
people say, well, this is Kali Yuga and that's the way it is. Again, that's fine. That's fine. But there's also, you're part of this.
yeah,
There has to be a moral impetus to say like, well, that's fine, but does that mean you're just going to participate in it, or let
yeah,
it happen without feeling anything? Say like, this shouldn't be. Doesn't mean, you may see it, doesn't mean, and you may think it's Kali Yuga, but that doesn't mean you should just allow people to be berated,
yeah,
or just having an
yeah,
uncivil
yeah,
discourse, or
yeah,
being abusive and hurtful in the way that they perceive that they should. This
yeah,
is how I talk with people. Like, you think that's normal?
yeah. Yeah, because we can say this Kali Yuga, but also we can say this is that Kali Yuga where Mahaprabhu came, and Mahaprabhu came to show the utmost compassion and love and mercy. So I'm supposed to represent that in Kali Yuga. So yeah,
Well,
this is Kali Yuga. So that's the implications of this is Kali Yuga means let's try. I'm thinking also in connection to what you mentioned. I'm sorry if I'm diverting, but on the topic, but I think it's connected. You are mentioning this like black white, I will say, like division in the campus there regarding the conflict Gaza situation, and creating this polarization, protests and rallies and so on, and of course with any complex situation like this, I'm thinking, how do you think we Gaudias, let's say, should interact with this uh, heart-shattering situations in the world in order to remain in touch with the suffering of the world? I'm not just saying this is Kali Yuga. That's my point. And
right.
how to actually remain empathic, remain open and active, and allow ourselves to be moved by it, or maybe we shouldn't do anything like that, because of course sometimes there may be devotees or people who may say that's Maya, that's in the going on the realm of
Right.
whatever.
Yeah.
Vyabhaharic realm, that's not paramartic, that's not transcendence, actual
Right.
reality. So which is your take on that in connection to this?
That's that's the insider question, right? we we know
It was coming, it
we
was
know
coming.
we know
Yeah.
how devotees are. It's true. Most, I think that is generally, well, I would say it's generally standpoint for many devotees. Keeps going off. I can't turn it off. I didn't want, but it's very. It is generally the standpoint to say like, well, these aren't our problems. This is from another. You know, this is not our battle. We don't. This isn't. We don't have a horse in this race. Let them.
Mm.
We have to focus on transcendence, or focus on our tradition. And
Or
some
focus on
people,
our travels, which I can understand. People, devotees will have their own things to solve. Fair enough. I want to
yeah,
be remain empathic to that. Yeah.
yeah, and others may say, well, we could do something. Let's go to the rally and we'll have Harinam. Some have had political uh, involvement in that way. We'll bring like kirtan there and promotion of
Mhm.
peace and things like that. So I think there is honestly, there's no, I think that's the problem, is if we just think there's one way that people deal with it. And I know, like, say Srila Prabhupada had said, like, these aren't our matters, and like, this is just a worldly thing, altruism, criticisms of altruism and things like that. But there are people who are going to be involved in that. Like, whether you're someone like me that's a chaplain, that we are involved, we we try to be. And even though you know, people look at me as a Vaishnava Hindu, and they say, "What do you have to do with this?" There's still people coming to my office
Mhm.
who maybe want to speak to someone that's not from one side or the other, and wants to be able to speak without having to fear, like, you know, there's going to be some kind of repercussion because there's like this dualistic divide. So
Mhm.
their devotees are going to have, there are going to be different devotees that have different opinions or
Yeah.
involvement in that, and we just have to accept that, because there are going to be, you know, devotees in either in Israel or in the Palestinian region. They are going to have feeling, they are going to have more concern than, say, an American devotee that was raised in, you know, like New Jersey, or, you know, the
Mhm.
middle of America, or India. And many people who have no involvement and say, like, this is a moral issue here, and I have to have a statement about it. And I think you're just going to have to accept that there's going to be different viewpoints of it.
Yeah.
And instead of saying, well, you shouldn't think about that because Prabhupada said we shouldn't think about issues like this,
Mhm.
it's
Mm.
not necessarily true for everybody.
Yeah.
That there were some devotees he thought you should go into, you know, politics, or you should study these things, but he would say you should study our text. But it's hard to study just our tradition without understanding the corpus of the world and the other traditions. So
Mm.
accepting that there's going to be a diversity
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
opinions, and there's going to be people who are very, if they're devotees and they're articulate about the issue, whether you feel like, as a community, for example, I would go to a Sunday feast and give the lecture and say, we have to be a part of this. You know, we have to go out.
Mm.
That I don't think is going to be necessarily helpful. But
No.
sometimes certain issues that a community, it would vary, to be frank. Like, it's complicated because sometimes if there were issues of, like, say, Black Lives Matter, maybe some people expected the temple to have a statement about that, you
Mm.
know. Or as an example, and I'm not saying, like, some people say, oh, well, you know, this is just, I'm going to turn off, I don't care about these things. And
Mhm.
but sometimes people will say, well, I'm disappointed that we didn't say anything about that.
Mhm.
And it's hard to really satisfy both sides of those things.
Mhm.
But the reality is, there's just going to be different pockets of people who deal with those issues, like 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 the Ram Mandir. Most temples were fully supportive of it. Of course, there are some other devotees who are a little bit more hesitant to be supportive for different reasons. People would say that
Mhm.
they were influenced by Western, you know, influenced, or some consider polluted by Western thought and things like that.
Mhm.
But there is just a variety of opinions of it, and
Yeah.
being able to kind of be able to hold all of those opinions and engage in them. And there will be, say, devotees for Black Lives Matter, and there will be devotees for,
Mhm.
you know, whether Palestinian or Israel,
Mm.
you know, returning hostages. They will gather together and try to make movements for those things, and
Mhm. Mhm.
that's
Yeah.
okay. So
Yeah. Yeah. At least as we were talking before, at least to allow for the space of that diversity and the possibility of conversation and dialogue, even though, I don't know, as you mentioned, the temple representative may not be taking a stance publicly on a Sunday feast, so to say.
yeah,
But at least not to, how to say, not to cancel the possibility of talking about that for those who feel the
yeah,
necessity to do so, and just like overemphasize our tradition, like the otherworldliness of our tradition as it, and as the only exclusive way
right,
of being part of Krishna bhakti, while most members of the community live somehow in connection to so many of these
yeah,
dynamics in the world. And many times, for if we want to share the message with others, the world is looking up to, okay, what's your opinion on this, which is your take on that, are you allowed to talk about that?
right,
Because if not, in many ways, I will say the tradition may seem like irrelevant to many people
yeah,
because of things that may be relevant to the tradition. So again, it's not
yeah,
one thing or the other, but at least the openness to allow that
It's, you know,
diversity.
the best example we had of this was the pandemic, and how
Mhm.
some temples were open, some were closed, and some required vaccines and some didn't. And you
Mm.
could see how polarized the
And the
community.
voters reacted as
Yeah.
intensely as I ever saw.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I was, and I, you know, because I, on both sides, I have friends and family that I care
Yeah.
about very deeply, but it divided that. But then you ask the temple presidents, and you know, they, it wasn't easy for them to say like we want to stay closed, because there were some people who were on this in the same community. They say we have to stay open, or requiring vaccines, and it's not the same for young people. A lot of maybe older devotees were like, well, I think we need to have the vaccine. So you're there trying to make decisions for entire communities, which a lot of people were just like, how could you make this decision for all of us? And it
Yeah.
it it's a difficult decision. It's just difficult. And some communities it benefited, and some communities it had repercussions that,
Mhm.
you know, they still don't, a lot of people still don't come back, or disappointed, or haven't really built their, they also have moral injury on both sides of
Yeah.
like faith and
Yeah. Yeah.
the community.
Yeah. I agree. Cool, Pradeep. I remember you mentioned. I mean, we were talking a few minutes ago about our Gaudiya Vaishnav community and certain things we may need to heal on a generational level. And I recall that your Gurudev made this series and some years ago. I think the name was The True Story of ISKCON, History of ISKCON, or something to that effect. I remember listening to those
Yeah.
uh, lectures. I think you recommended those to me, and probably in that drive that we have, that's already a historical moment in in our
In my,
timeline, that drive. and
yes.
and and I listened to them. I remember I was in Jagannath Puri doing a Panchakarma retreat and listening to them. So my point is, as he in that particular moment tried to acknowledge and learn from history and learn from past mistakes, if you will, among other things, of course, positive appreciation. You, as a disciple of his, so to say, as a representative in Parampara, if you have to give a similar seminar nowadays today, which will be some of the main issues that you personally feel we need to address and heal in our Gaudiya Vaishnava community?
Wow. Well, I mean, wow, that is a really great question.
You have to write your own book on radical personalism, I'm sure, in that direction, but
Well,
a few thoughts.
yeah, I think what my Guru Maharaj had done, especially during that period of like the zonal charyas and the kind of reform that had happened,
Yeah, yeah.
it was very timely. It was necessary. It was needed. People needed to hear like these things, hear that these things are happening, and there
Yeah.
was no other way. There was no internet, so like what you have are lectures, and some of them get into the like the nitty gritty of like some details of like maybe some scandalous things,
Hmm.
uh, and even like details of, you know, how they were handled, but maybe not even as much details as you get now with the internet and all different viewpoints of everything kind of all
Yeah.
simultaneously available. As far as like that I think we still have some of those elements there, because at that time, during that era of my Guru Maharaj's reform, like ISKCON was at a low, like the populations, the temples were empty,
Mm.
because people were either just like they couldn't handle it anymore. They had their moral injury. They left. They couldn't be a part of it. They may have kept their faith, but they left the community.
Yeah.
And so now we're in an era where the temples are building up again, and
Hmm.
they're being populated. And people, maybe we have a different structure, but I still see the same things can tend to happen. Like if there's an accusation against someone, there, you know, the idea that if you say something about somebody that's, you know, that's Vaishnava aparad,
Aparat.
we shouldn't say that. And those are, you know, typical kind of things that
Mm.
perpetuate, you know, dangerous things. I've seen it in other, not, it's not just our tradition, it's not just the Gaudiya tradition. It happened in the Catholic Church. It happened all the other chaplains I ask them about, they have the very similar cases where these kind of things are
Okay.
perpetuated. The
Yeah.
silence is perpetuated because it's like
Mm.
it's tied into like a
Yeah.
type of moral
I was
community
going to
moral
ask you,
law.
since as a chaplain you have, we will go there, lots of interfaith connection with people from other traditions. I wanted to know how much of the things you're mentioning you found you have found similar
Oh
templates
yeah, because
from them. That
in
has been
Newark.
my experience with people from other tradition, but I
Well,
was
I didn't think about like because I was just like I was sitting with like two chaplains in Newark, and I was like, man, I'm just having a lot of problems because we had this issue with the Gurukul in Mayapur, and I was like, yeah, I'm really having a hard time. I was like, we just found out there was like this horrible abuse case, and I go up to my friend, I'm like, my chaplain friend, I'm like, do you have this? Like, and he's like, I'm a disciple of Christ. You know the disciples of Christ? Have you ever heard of Jonestown? He
Mm,
broke off from
mm,
Disciples of Christ. Jim Jones broke off and started Jonestown. I was like, oh, that's worse. That's all. I'm like, that's historical. And
yeah.
then I went up to my other friend chaplain, and I said, what about you? Do you have stuff like this? He's like, I'm a Seventh-day Adventist. I was like, but you guys are Seventh-day Adventists. He's like, you ever hear of David Koresh? Like
Yeah.
that they're Branch Davidians. They came from Seventh-day Adventists. I was like, oh, whoa. I was, I was like, just down the line, you know, even though I spoke to the Catholic, of course, we know the Catholic Church and go into details. I'm like, how did you feel about cover-ups? And it's like, you know, we're
Mhm.
trying to be better. This is where we're trying.
Yeah, I'm
It's
saying
not.
this also just so we don't become also too, how to say, too hard on our own tradition. Like we have this and you are, but more like understanding in terms of, okay, this seems to be part of human nature with certain power dynamics are in place and stuff like that, authority, pyramidal
Mhm.
structures, and it happens in our tradition and every other tradition. So, I mean, not to downplay the
Well,
whole
the
issue,
thing
but
is,
just to
I was
gain
sitting with a
more
group.
acceptance of the reality on an overall
Yeah.
level. Yeah.
Well, the thing is, I was sitting with my wife and a group of like peers, friends, devotees, and we wanted to talk about what had happened in Mayapur. And I
Mm,
think we all agreed one of the worst parts of this is that accepting, like in our hearts, it's almost like it's prepared for that. And that's the saddest part of it is
mm,
that, well, it doesn't surprise us that that happened because it's
mm,
happened before. And that's
mm,
why I'm saying that's moral injury.
mm.
Why is that not a surprise to me? That
Yeah.
hurts. Like
What's
the
that
fact that I look and
normalized?
say,
Yeah.
wow, no surprise. It's like, but it's not like we should just be naive. But that hurt the most. The fact that we're just like, well, you know, it's happened before. It'll happen
Yeah.
again, and
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
should not be it.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
we
We don't
shouldn't
want
feel
to.
that
We
way.
don't want to end up in the extreme of the cynicism either. No,
Right.
naive on one side, on cynicism on the other. Which generally that's what happens. It's say that those who have been extremely naive generally are the ones who become the worst cynics eventually.
Right.
and,
I
and
think
we don't
that
want to normalize that or to
yeah.
become indifferent like, oh yeah, I knew it will happen because it happened, so it becomes kind of standardized, and there's no shock in that
I, I
connection that yeah.
I think that there's a level that we have to be like that type of like not let's just say resilience because that's also a term I see shown around, but
Mm,
there is an idealism. There is
mm,
like it's not even some people think hope is a bad word, but we do have to kind of model something better. We
mhm,
have to. I
yeah,
mean, even if it's Kali Yuga, it's still the
yeah,
gold. There's still a golden age. There still has to be better. And
yeah,
I hate the idea that something like this would be like these things get connected to a tradition of Chaitanya, to a tradition of the
mm,
Goswamis, to a tradition of Krishna and the
mm,
Bhagavad Gita, like where it's Dharma and compassion and love and beautiful theology. It
yeah,
shouldn't we should have a standard to say like that's I can't just accept that. And it
mhm,
hurts. That hurts the most when you're just like, well, you know, get ready for the next one, or
mm,
you know, or even like being suspicious of you know, well, we shouldn't have sannyasis anymore. You know,
mm,
that's our, you know, and but maybe that's a way somebody wants to resolve things, you know, but it takes a discourse to kind of say like, wait, let's try to understand
yeah, yeah,
and also understand like, okay, you don't want to have sannyasis. Why do you think, you know, we may some people think Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati he created this
mm,
sannyas tradition. I know
mm.
it's true. There was no historical Gaudiya mat. There's no mat. There are other mats. There's Shankara mat, but
There were
the but the,
sannyasis.
but there was a need for it. There was a reform
Mhm,
that happened there. That's
mhm,
why it
mhm.
was sannyasis because they were
Yeah,
supposed to be the moral exemplars. It was a reform,
yeah,
and then here we are generations later, and we're also now the opposite has happened.
Mhm.
Now the sannyas is looked at as the, something is wrong there.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so
I remember talking with some sannyasis like, okay, Prabhupada Bhaktisiddhanta established a sannyas order because on one level he saw that some people in the Babaji order were not representing the renounced face of the tradition, but now so many sannyasis have misrepresented the tradition. Maybe
right,
we should accept Babaji or something
yeah,
to
what an
reclaim the
impact that
proper.
has.
Hmm. Yeah,
Just to think,
whatever may be the external packaging it's presented with, again, as you mentioned, there should be at least conversations about that instead of let's banish the whole sannyas order. Let's send whomever genuine sannyasi remain to some island over there so they don't bother us. But
right,
yeah, I've came with a lot of situations of people who even told me, Maharaj, I like you very much, but but you are a sannyasi. No, like I feel inspired and I kind of like, I would like to trust you, but there
yeah,
is a problem, and that's the fact that you are a sannyasi. And I was
right.
like, wow, no,
Do I know that
and I
person?
and I and I can understand. I can understand you. I will tell, but what to do? Yeah, I was thinking what you mentioned also, that how much it breaks your heart to see such a beautiful wisdom tradition like ours to be connected with scandal and stuff like this. And but I remember talking with one Christian friend, priest. We made a podcast last year, Adam Bukon. He wrote a book called "Follow Your Heartbreak." No, like playing with Joseph Campbell's "Follow Your Bliss," like, but implying if something breaks your heart, let that be something that ignites your life purpose, so to say. So I think also there is place for that. No, that if we as members of the tradition feel this is breaking my heart, like what you were mentioning, okay, this situation of abuse came, it breaks my heart. I don't want to normalize this. I don't want to become accustomed to this. I don't want to either be cynic nor naive. I
Mhm.
want this to break my heart, so to say, and then I want to do something about it. No, I want to follow my heartbreak, so to let me be taken to whatever my heartbreak takes me, so to say. No, I appreciated his stance, no, because sometimes he will say, we may think, okay, whatever gives me joy, I will go there, and he will say also whatever breaks your heart,
Yeah,
someone is calling you in that direction. No,
yeah,
so.
yeah,
So I think that's a nice way for us as members of a tradition, if something breaks our heart in the context of our tradition, to use that heartbreak in a practical way, so to say,
right,
empowering way as well.
right. And we can't forget it. I mean, that's one thing my Guru Maharaj, of course, and that's a quote. We don't learn the lessons of history, and that is a
Hmm.
problem. What we're talking about society, I do see it that we are making the same kind of mistakes, and as at least in ISKCON, there's the community is building, especially in South Asia, but much more temples and larger communities, and the more kind of power there could be, a power structure. I do feel a little concerned about that, but I hope, I think being vigilant, and hopefully we learn from our past mistakes, and being, maybe let's restructure schools, maybe a little bit more. But those are things we can do, and they seem to be okay for now. They seem to be okay, but yeah, I do worry. I do worry. I see it happen. I do see elements of it still happening.
Yeah, yeah, and at least allow that ongoing concern to allow for ongoing conversations about whatever is an ongoing concern for the members of any community. I think that's so protective and so, I mean, preemptive. Like, okay, let's allow the dialogue chamber
Yes.
or current going on. No, let's not
Yeah.
cancel it, but promote that because it needs to be promoted. There's not enough, again,
If you
dialogue
feel that
conversation.
heartbreak, just let it go. Just don't. And that happens during japa. If you're really doing japa, you'll feel this heartbreak. It's
Yeah, don't
prepared.
repress. Don't
Yeah.
repress your heartbreak. Yeah, whatever breaks your heart, allow that to happen. It's not Maya. It's not bad. Whatever. Yeah. In this connection, cooperative, I was also thinking, I think it was last year, our last physical meeting was in Asheville, that we were,
Oh
Jana,
yeah.
was
Yes.
doing a concert there, and we met a few hours before that, and we had some nice conversation
Yeah,
for a
thank
few
you.
hours.
That was a
Yeah, that
very
was,
frank conversation. I thank you for
yeah, yeah.
being
I
straightforward.
appreciated that. I remember you just started being like bluntly honest. I don't remember even what you say, but I remember that was the that was the premise of the conversation, like viscerally confrontational in a loving way. So I say, wow, I like this guy is my friend, or if he wants to be my friend, because if not, you cannot start a conversation like that. So that was beautiful. Thank you. And I
Thank you.
remember we were talking about radical personalism. I remember that was the time of publishing the book. And if I'm not mistaken, one of your main points at that time was also related to Guru Tattva and to the dynamics of Guru disciple relationship. I don't know if you want to bring some point in that connection. I don't recall exactly the conversation we had, but it was a very interesting one. So
Well,
I
I mean,
trust your good memory more than mine. So
well, do you wanna? Should I? Because there are. It is complicated. I mean, that I was very frank with you, and I had concerns, and we could talk about it now.
yeah, let continue to be as frank as you were that day with me now. Now you have to be more frank than before. It has to
Well,
be
one
an
of
ongoing increasing.
I remember asking you, and and also
Mm.
kind of realizing it myself is that in our community and how it's come to be, and especially if you're initiated, you're involved in the community, you're a part of the
Mhm.
community. A lot of our identity is defined by
Who is your
who
guru?
your lineage, yeah,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
directly who is your guru. And I
Mm.
remember I went to Philadelphia once. The Philadelphia temple, and I just went to take darshan, and all the doors were locked. I was trying to get in. I knocked on the door, and they're like, "Who are you?" And they're like, "Who's your guru?" And I was like, well,
Mm.
"Those are your questions?" I was like that. That's weird, but okay. But it's, I mean, it may be reflective of that idea that, well, how does one retain an identity
Yeah.
without that? And I realized, like, well, obviously for me, I was like, that I don't think that's fair. Obviously you don't have to have a guru to have an identity. I mean, a lot of people who wouldn't say they have quote unquote a guru. I mean, but also I reflected on it, you know, after that. I mean, you have so many gurus, teachers in your life. It's not like
Mm.
you do, but
Mm.
there's such a formal that's formalized in our diksha, and then that way of
which is
teaching.
which is paradoxical because in our tradition, particularly coming from Prabhupada Bhaktisiddhanta, there's also this emphasis on siksha parampara,
Right,
but nonetheless, in certain situations or moments, you tell me who is your diksha guru.
right,
No, like you cannot mention anyone else. It's just
right,
that name. I want that name, and it's
right.
like, but I thought we were supposed to be in this particular tradition, which acknowledges the guru principle from this particular place.
Right.
So how much we are walking our talk, so to say, in that connection as well, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's what I asked you,
Yeah,
because I think
yeah.
we are that's how we see the world. Like, that's when when you get initiated, you're like, okay, I am representative of this
Mm,
lineage through my guru.
mm,
And so I asked you, that's what I just said, well, how do you see the world now? How does that affect you? And
yeah,
maybe also out of concern, because I was just like, I'm, I
yeah,
want you
yeah.
to be okay. I When I met you in Newark, you just left South America for the first time,
Mm,
and so that's, I knew from that context.
yeah,
So it's, and now
yeah.
I just like, I was like, tell me what the plan is, because I want to make sure
That
everything's
you
okay.
don't, that I don't kill myself,
No,
basically.
it's not, but yes,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
want
I mean, it makes sense because I mean, if I run out of identity, that can be such a desperate place. I mean, I think that's the worst thing that we can go through. I mean, if you have no sense of identity whatsoever, it's like it's hell in its own way.
yeah,
So, and,
yeah,
and, and that can happen in so many ways because sometimes also it can happen to just a devotee who had his or her sense of secular identity, let's say, and then they adopt this tradition and they receive sometimes a very blunt denial of all the things you thought you were. but actually you are this now, but I don't have any realization of that new identity. So
Yeah.
I kind of reject my previous sense of identity. I'm not able to fully embrace the new one. So I end up in a limbo of no identity, and who knows what's the consequence of that. So that's another way of speaking about the non-identity paradigm. And but no, I really appreciated your your confrontation, loving confrontation at that time. I don't recall what I may have said, but I really I really remember that. Of course, that was a shocking moment of where I was kind of rethinking who I am. Basically, I have to boil down back to who I am. Of course, from a different place. When I was 17, I was in my big existential teenage crisis. Who I am. I was asking who I am, who I am. Then I found the devotees. The question was answered, so to say. Eventually, I connected to with my first guru, but eventually I had to take a distance from him, as you know. So again, who I am, no, live in South America. Then I met you in the U.S. Then I received a new answer to that question with another guru, but then another distance there. So again, who I am from a different place. No, so also I think. Uh, we all should be willing to ask that question many times in our lives also, no? Not to fall into easy answers of who I am, because that's in so many ways we will need to answer to reply to that question through life. So many things will happen. And as you mentioned, okay, someone might think if you don't have a guru you have no identity, which of course I disagree with, but also because that entails the assumption that if I have a guru I have identity, and you can have a guru and have no proper sense of who you actually are, or you have a wrong sense of identity which you shouldn't have, just by merely being affiliated with a particular person. And
Right.
of course the whole question boils down to, what does it mean to have a guru? No, it's just I was initiated by that person, or it's about my inner participation in that relationship, my inner commitment with the principle of guru, which is not limited to one single person. And I know some people may say, Maharaj, you are getting too abstract, be concrete, name me one person. But the thing is that that's not how Guru Tattva operates. I mean, Guru Tattva is a complex tattva, and you just cannot limit that to uh, a physical connection with that person. If that's there, everything is there. If that's not there, nothing is there. I mean, that's a black and white thinking that for me do not apply to a very gray like reality like Guru Tattva, very nuanced. I understand that in some stages in our life we may think like that, and we may even need to think like that, but at some point that perimeter is suffocating, so to say, no?
Right.
So but yeah, I don't again recall what I replied to you, but I will say that I really had a big uh, inner journey into the further depths of everything, even my shadow, and trying to rediscover myself, and learn to reply to that question, who I am, from a new place, so to say, because I still have an identity.
Right.
Yeah. So I will say that the whole situation forced
Yes.
me to rediscover my identity in a new way, and I'm happy for that, and I'm grateful for the circumstances for that. So yeah, that's what comes now. I don't know
Well,
how much does agree with what we talked that day.
no, clearly.
Okay.
I mean, and I think it's also kind of flourished also, and
Hmm.
meeting with, in some ways opens like the restrictions of certain, like being aligned in one kind of way. But I think one thing I also thought, and I admire you because the what you what you have kind of come through in many ways represents kind of the complexities of the structure that we have. In the first
Hmm.
case with Brinda, your experience, you very well articulated. You wrote, you had a statement that you made, and I read it
Hmm.
back then,
Okay.
and I was like, this is well articulated. It's fair, and it's virtue. There's a virtue. There's a value to it. And I know that it's not as simple as that. I know there was also repercussions for you for making a statement like that.
Hmm.
And in the later case, um, also I just saw just such an interest, just the kind of dynamic of the pedagogical system. Um, it was just so it's just it kind of pointed out to me where our community, our society is, just general, like as broad as the
Mm,
Gaudiya Vaishnava
mm,
community,
mm,
and where we are. And there are a lot of people in your place, you but may have experienced one version of what you've experienced,
yeah.
one side of that. And you are a person that's still moving forward in spiritual, like really looking for the truth and trying to find a better sense of how to repair these. I, they're just obvious, like for me there are issues of like power, I think,
Mm,
without, I know hierarchies exist. Me and my wife, we talk about it always, constantly, but I think essentially they are issues of power.
mm,
And I think the way that you approach that is humble, and it's kind of in some ways a response to that. And
mm.
I appreciate what you do in that case, in that sense. I hope that's 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 why I like talking to you, and when you're in the area, I want to meet with you and see how you're doing and just hear from you, because you've always also inspired me.
Mm.
I have also, sometimes when I hear you speak and do discourse on scripture, I appreciated the points that you've made and your realizations about them. So
Thank you.
um
Thank you.
anyway,
Thank
that's
you. No, thank you. I'm humbled by that. I'm not taking that like a flattery that makes me like, oh, but it's just humbling, and for me it's necessary to have the support of friends, and support not necessarily that they agree with me, but affection and people that somehow are willing to understand what not only me but anyone is going through, and offer some anything, even in confrontational way, but some feedback. And yeah, I'm still just trying to rediscover who I am. I'm basically, I move on not because I'm a hero or I'm better than anyone. I'm just trying to continue. I need to continue replying to that question, who I am.
yeah,
That's the thing I have to do every single day of my life. That I wake up and open my eyes. It's like, who are you today? Who are you? No? Who you want to be? What's all that you can be? All those questions are entailed into the who I am. Who I am. No, so not like a like anything wrong, but just like what keeps life and day moving with purpose and meaning. So,
yeah,
could
amen.
predict one question that comes to mind. Maybe we can close with that if you have a few more minutes.
Sure,
That
yeah.
because that's also included in your bio, and that's something that I like to touch upon. I really like that, because you are, I mean, I know that you are also fond of a few things. You're again a scholar, you're a chaplain, you're a Gaudiya Vaishnav, you're many things. You're fond of hardcore music, for example, but we won't go there now today.
That's not in the bio though, I don't think.
That's not in the academic bio, yeah. But also, you're very much engaged with Vaishnav ritual, basically. No? You are very familiar with that realm. And I personally, to be honest, I don't have that much the DNA, so to say, but I totally acknowledge the importance of ritual, or of symbol, of especially, I will say, of rites of passage, that sometimes in our tradition we'll call them samskar, as you
Mhm.
referred to in the bio, and rites of passage that may help practitioners to transition from one chapter of their lives to another. So, what's your take on that? I mean, on not only on ritualistic realm, but especially on this notion of the importance of rites of passage. That on a personal level, I think in our community we need to bring that more to the forth. No, like not only
Right,
like a how to say, like a funny nice social, I mean, it's a social dynamic that creates bonds, but it's also okay, let's have the boy if he picks the book or not, but also for adults, for teenagers, and for all the different stages from since we are born till we leave this body, the importance of this rites of passage to create the awareness in those who are going through the rite, and in others, like, okay, now whatever, you are passing from childhood to teenagehood. You are becoming a man, a
right.
woman today,
Yeah.
and entering into that space by the force of ritual and symbol. So, whatever thoughts you may like to share. I know this is a whole separate podcast, but and we are
Sure.
almost concluding. But a few
Yeah.
words, if you like.
Well, first, like the disclosures. Since I left New York, other than like puja, like I haven't been able, I haven't done much in terms of like some scars and homeless, but I had I had done a lot more back in New Jersey. Just it's
Yeah.
only because I'm adjusting to be here. Like I have my homokun and I plan to do and everything. It just
Yeah.
that I right. This has been very encompassing, like a lot of the work here at Stanford. So and it's just been a new environment
Yeah.
to learn. So that's the disclosure. But that being said, like I have spent time in South India with a good friend of mine who I grew up with, Brahma Horta,
Yeah.
and we, you know, he kind of, you know, introduced me more into the world of Pancharatra and the ritual and things like that. And there are other friends like Nam also is also
Yeah.
has learned and does a lot of does some scars for his family. And we have just like a group of friends who are priests that who we confer. It is a small group. I guess I'm giving you a bit of a perspective is that it's a small group of devotees who've kind of traced the history of like ritual and value it,
Mhm.
not just it's like its beauty, but it's also its when you see like Sri Vaishnava worship and the
Mm.
pageantry of it, it's like it just leaves such an impression. Of course, like we have like kirtan, it's a different tradition, but when you see it, you see like all of like the style of worship, all of the you know the accoutrements, the paraphernalia,
Mm.
and it's just it just has a striking impression.
It creates a samskar.
That I mean that's the setup, and you know we've done I've done like installations, prana pratishtas, being part of the team for prana pratishtas for temple like inaugurations of deities.
Mm.
And I was part of the team in India at the Eco Village for the Madan Mohan Temple, and New Jersey, and at Bhakti Center for Gaurachandra for a deity
Okay.
who I very much like have a deep connection with, but just part of the team, and for that installation. So rituals have just a very, I know because our Gaudiya tradition is very much like, it's not necessarily critical of it. I mean, Gaudiya Vaishnavism is, it's, it, our tradition is reflective of like the context it exists in, which was very like
Yeah.
maybe leaning heavily on ritual and in
Mm.
orthodoxy.
Mm.
And most bhakti traditions in many ways are like very deconstructionalist in some ways, not like
Mhm.
they're not like old. The problem with deconstruction is that it breaks things down and leaves it there. But a lot of reform movements, that's what they do. It may break it down, but it has to be rebuilt again.
Mhm.
And that doesn't mean like building something new. It means taking what was there and
Mhm.
and trying to build a better structure,
Yeah.
a more relevant structure that can move forward or something, because sometimes some movements can't. So anyway, as we were trying to see our tradition as doing rituals and found ourselves in South India with the Sri Vaishnavas, who were this kind of source of like Gopal Bhatta Goswami's ideas of how we would do ritual, and
Mhm.
Satguru Sardipika, which is some people are not sure if it's truly him, but Hari Bhakti Vilas
Yeah.
is often, he's not the author, but he's often referred to there because he was a Bhatta. He's from Srirangam.
Yeah.
So anyway, so a roundabout way, some scars rituals have, yeah, there I still, even if there are people come to my office for different um, from different faiths, and sometimes like when they're going through especially different things, especially with the loss and especially with
Mm.
grief, I
Mm.
recommend some things like, have you considered like what I call a therapeutic ritual? The truth of the
Mhm.
matter is there is something about a ritual we need to, whether for closure, that's
Yeah.
one thing, but it's
Yeah.
also to mark a time, like closure, because we always think of death, but actually is about to mark these kind of um, these key moments in life that something is achieved. And a
Yeah.
lot of times we go through it without actually noting, I've graduated from here, or
Mm.
I've even something like, this is the first grains I'm eating. That's not,
Mhm.
that's for everyone to acknowledge, like, you're at another stage of your growth.
Yeah.
Hair cutting ceremony, like I know with our nephew. I remember where this is Nam is doing the hair cutting ceremony in the um in the middle. The nephew's like, "Can we just do this later?" So like his hair is half cut. He had like long hair, or a little chundri, chundri. He's like, "Can we just do this later?" It's like half cut. He's like, "We'll finish it later." And he started crying. He's like, "Let's just do it later." But after the haircut, he just looked like an older child. He was never
Mhm.
the same
Mm.
again because of that
Mm.
ceremony.
Mm.
Not like it's like changed. It's also sad to say like, oh, that childhood is different. But now he's like an older brother, and he's just like such a great kid.
Yeah.
He's just like,
Entering into a new space of identity, so to say, no?
yeah,
Self-conception.
yeah. That was a very roundabout way of going into the value
Mm.
of it, but it's death in terms of death and Shraddha and all, and like um, what is it, Antya Antyeshti, that the um, people would think, well, that I need that kind of like that ceremony to kind of close off, feel, or not close off, but like that sense of closure and sense
Yeah.
of like, it's time to, it's
Yeah.
not,
Which
but
allows further disclosure of a next chapter, so to say.
yes, and
Yeah.
acceptance,
Cool.
and like understanding that the impact of that person and
Yeah.
things like that, and giving them credit and gratitude.
Yeah.
But
As well
that's,
as allowing themselves to grieve for some period as well, no?
yes,
To
yeah,
establish this point that you are allowed, you give yourself permission to grieve this loss, no? If you will,
yes,
as part of
it's
the
huge. I
process.
mean, that is in terms of the work I've done as a chaplain, that's been major. It's the end of life I've done, because I
Mhm.
was also hospice chaplain.
Mm.
And so a lot of times I spoke at funerals and things like that, and it's just, they just want the priest to come, and
Mm.
you know I'm a multi-faith chaplain a lot in those contexts, and they're
Okay.
just happy that there's a chaplain here. For
Mhm.
them, they equate with a priest, and that is a ceremony. That's a ceremonial aspect for them. Like this person will say some words and prayer or something like that.
Mm.
So, but yeah, that's but that's, we always associate like these rites, the impact of those rites at the end of life. But the truth of the matter is, you to really have like a full impact, it has to kind of go through all of those stages of life,
Mhm.
because it really marks these kind of periods and stages that you're going through. And so I just say, I guess in short, it's valuable to have some level of like ritual or ceremony to mark these things, even like a griha pravesh, which isn't maybe
Mhm.
it wasn't maybe like in like say Satkriya Sardipika, there's no griha pravesh per se.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
But like to have that kind of like, this is a house, and not to say that it's not orthodox, it is an orthodox tradition. I mean, it's a traditional
Mhm.
griha pravesh, but just to say like, we're in this home and we're welcoming the Purusha,
Mhm.
the Vastu Purush, we're welcoming auspiciousness into our home, like a good spirit, a good, not spirit, but like, well, we're welcoming Vishnu, we're welcoming Narayan, we're welcoming Krishna into to be you know, the
Yeah.
presiding the presiding deity of the home.
Yeah. It's basically, I would say it's about taking some time to, as you mentioned, as we're trying to make a little full circle regard going back to the ministry of presence. Just taking some time to be present into what's going on at that precise moment, not just like, okay, open the door to this new house or whatever, let's feed my child, let's cut his hair, but just let's make it more, let's be more present in what's happening in this precise moment, and let's mark that. So that creates, I don't know how much this is, but some scar can refer to these particular rights, but also some scars refers to impressions that we receive. So I like to connect the two, because if you really enter into this rites of passage properly, it creates an impression, no? So
Yeah.
the samskars creates samskars, which of course build upon our sense of self, so to say, and allow us to navigate through life with proper, yeah, acknowledgement of each chapter, so to say, not
Yeah.
evasiveness, not denial, not sitting on top of our emotions, not again repression of grief, but everything is allowed with a proper sense of awareness in each particular place and stage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, one thing last thing I'd say about that is that when the reason why I went into chaplaincy is that I was at the temple. I was doing my, I did my puja. I was one of the pujaris. So I did the worship. I did the arti,
Mhm.
and then someone was there for grief. Well, one, I did a shraddha ceremony for someone, and then they kind of just left. And I thought, like, I can't just give the ritual. I should give them more than that.
Mm.
And so then I started looking more. Again, I had looked at it before, but I was like, well, let me look into chaplaincy, because part of that is grief support and grief counseling and training how to do that. And so I thought, okay, well, here, after I did my CPE, my clinical pastoral education, I came back and, I tried to incorporate aspects uh, of like what I've learned about grief into providing not just the ceremony, not just the
Mhm.
ritual, but also the support. But then I also realized, like, in our community, sometimes it's simply the ritual is the support. And as
Mm.
much as that wasn't what I wanted or thought, sometimes that's just what people need, is
Yeah.
a ceremony, is a ritual.
Yeah.
And
Even if the ritual may not take the shape of even if some, let's say, if some person may not know how to do it, the ritual in the particular way it's done, a certain tradition, at least to take the moment to somehow acknowledge what's going on in one way or another, ritualistically or something, right?
yeah, yeah,
Because
that's what they
yeah,
need.
yeah, yeah,
And
makes
the
sense.
Shraddha ceremony, Shraddha Kriya, is very much designed not just for the person who's passed, but the ancestors, and it just brings back this a sense of like the bit the ancestors are welcoming this person. There's like, it's welcoming everything. It's in some ways a celebration
Yeah,
in that way.
yeah, which is yeah. To talk about ancestors and how to keep a sense of ancestry, that's a whole separate conversation. But I think also it's an important
Yeah,
one
yeah.
that we may need to be having for sure. Cool, Pradeep. I think we are almost on time. I don't know if there's anything else you may like to just share to close. Any words, concluding words, closing words that come to your heart, mind in this precise moment?
No, I'm just I'm always happy to talk with you, and I'm always happy to see the work you're doing, because whether I also actually would I know you were working on the idea of Chaitanya and worship, and then the idea of like the transcendent world of Chaitanya.
Mm,
That was a project
mm.
before Radical Personalism. I know it got a little bit derailed, but I hope that you, because I also have some questions about it now. You generated those questions, and I have been trying to
Mm.
understand it a little bit more. But maybe I know you have a lot more like
Yeah,
pertinent. But
yeah.
if it ever comes back to that, I hope we could have a little discussion on that.
I hope the same. Yeah, still some other book projects came in the way, but that one is waiting there. So that's coming. That's coming, and I'm looking forward for further elaboration on that. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming. And I'll share again the contact of Kul Pradeep Prabhu for those who would like to connect with him. It's K Pradeep, KPRADIPA at stanford.edu. So thank you so much, Kul Pradeep Prabhu, for being, everyone else for being connected. And as you know, now we are streaming this Free Radical podcast twice per month, every 2 weeks. So I'll see you in the following 2 weeks. And again, one more time, Pradeep Prabhu, Pranam, thank you so much for joining us. See you very soon.
Raj, always great to talk to you.
Yeah, see you.